The first gunshot roared through the empty streets of Florence, Colorado, just as the sun began to disappear behind the jagged Rocky Mountain peaks. Hannah Porter didn't flinch as the bullet splintered wood near her head, her steady hands continuing to load supplies into her father's old wagon. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to scare her away from what remained of the once thriving silver mining town. It was May 1883, and Florence had been slowly dying since the silver crash the previous year. What had once been home to over 2,000 souls now sheltered just one: Hannah, the 22-year-old daughter of the town's former doctor. Most folks had packed up and moved on months ago, seeking fortune elsewhere, but Hannah stayed, tending to the remnants of her father's life after consumption took him that winter. "I know you're there," she called out, her voice echoing between the abandoned storefronts. "Your aim needs work, mister." The only response was the howl of wind through empty doorways and the gentle clink of swinging saloon doors. Hannah sighed, reaching for the Winchester rifle propped against the wagon wheel. The desert air grew colder as twilight deepened, bringing with it the peculiar loneliness that only a ghost town at dusk could provide. She had almost convinced herself the shot had been fired by some passing drifter when the crunch of boots on gravel caught her attention. Hannah whirled around, rifle raised, to find a man standing at the far end of the street. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a worn Stetson pulled low over his eyes and a duster that had seen better days. "State your business," Hannah demanded, keeping the rifle trained on the stranger. The man raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. "Wasn't me who fired that shot, madam. I heard it too, came to investigate." Hannah didn't lower her weapon. "Then who are you and what are you doing in Florence?" "Name's Yates Donovan," he replied, his voice carrying a slight Texas drawl. "I'm tracking a gang that's been robbing trains between here and Pueblo. Thought I might find them holed up in this ghost town." He took a cautious step forward. "What I didn't expect was to find anyone still living here." "Well, you found me," Hannah said, "and I'm not interested in whatever trouble you're bringing." Yates squinted past her at the darkening town. "Miss, I don't mean to alarm you, but I think whoever fired that shot is still around, probably watching us right now." His hand rested casually near his holstered Colt. No one should face the dark alone in a place like this, not with Blackwell's gang possibly lurking about. "I've been facing it alone for months now," Hannah replied, but uncertainty crept into her voice. The town had never felt threatening before, empty and sad, yes, but not dangerous. Now shadows seemed to stretch longer between the buildings, and every creak of weathered timber sounded like footsteps. "My camp's just outside town," Yates offered. "I'd feel a sight better knowing you were somewhere safe tonight." Hannah hesitated, pride warring with practicality. The man seemed genuine enough, and she'd dealt with enough liars and cheats in her 22 years to recognize most. Still, trust came at a premium in the West. "I have my own place," she finally said. "My father's house. It's secure enough." Yates nodded respectfully. "Then I'll see you safely there if you'll allow it. These men I'm tracking, they're not the kind to leave witnesses." Another shot cracked through the evening air closer this time, sending splinters flying from a hitching post beside them. Hannah ducked instinctively, and when she looked up, Yates had drawn his revolver with impressive speed. "That settles it," he said grimly. "We're leaving. Now." This time Hannah didn't argue. She grabbed her rifle and the small satchel of supplies she'd gathered, then climbed onto the wagon seat. Yates swung up beside her, taking the reins from her hands with a decisive motion. "Which way?" he asked, scanning the deepening shadows. "End of town, white house with blue shutters," Hannah directed, keeping her rifle ready as Yates urged the horse forward. They rattled down the main street, past the abandoned mercantile, the shuttered assay office, and the silent saloon. Every building held memories for Hannah: the general store, where her father had bought her penny candy as a child; the schoolhouse, where she'd taught briefly before it closed; the church, where they'd held his funeral with only 5 mourners present. "Mind telling me why you're still here when everyone else has gone?" Yates asked as they drove, his eyes constantly moving, watching for threats. Hannah's grip tightened on her rifle. "My father built that house with his own hands, practiced medicine here for 15 years. When he died, I couldn't just leave, not right away." She didn't mention the debt collectors circling like vultures, waiting to claim what little remained of her inheritance. Yates guided the wagon around a corner, and Hannah's house came into view. It stood apart from the other buildings, a modest clapboard structure that still maintained an air of dignity despite needing paint and repairs. The doctor's shingle still hung beside the door, swinging slightly in the evening breeze. "Inside, quick," Yates said as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "I'll see to the horse." Hannah hurried to unlock the door while Yates unhitched the horse and led it to the small stable behind the house. By the time he joined her inside, she had lit several lamps and was stoking a small fire in the stove. "You've kept this place nice," he observed, removing his hat as he stepped inside. It was a simple gesture of respect that Hannah appreciated. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly aware of how long it had been since she'd entertained a visitor. "It's not much, but it's home." "It's more than most have," Yates said, moving to the window to scan the darkening street. His face was clearer in the lamplight, weathered but handsome, with intelligent gray eyes and a jaw shadowed with stubble. He couldn't be much more than 30, Hannah guessed, but his eyes held the experience of someone older. "So you're a lawman?" Hannah asked, setting a kettle on the stove. "U.S. Marshal," Yates confirmed, briefly showing her a silver badge before tucking it back into his vest pocket. "Been tracking the Blackwell gang for 3 months now. They hit a train near Trinidad, killed the engineer and 2 passengers. Word is they're heading north, and abandoned towns make good hiding places." Hannah nodded, the gravity of her situation becoming clearer. "I've heard stories about them. Didn't think they'd come this far into Colorado. Money has a way of drawing men into new territories," Yates replied grimly. "Speaking of which, it's not safe for you here, miss." "Porter. Hannah Porter," she supplied, pouring hot water into 2 cups for coffee. "And I told you, I'm not leaving my home." Yates accepted the offered cup with a nod of thanks. "Miss Porter, I admire your determination, but these men won't think twice about burning this town to the ground with you in it if they think you've seen them." "Then I'll make sure they don't see me," Hannah countered stubbornly. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats in the distance, several horses, moving fast. Yates immediately doused the nearest lamp, plunging half the room into darkness. "Get down," he ordered quietly, drawing his revolver again. "And stay away from the windows." Hannah complied, crouching behind her father's old desk as Yates positioned himself beside the front window, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtains. The hoofbeats grew louder, then slowed to a walk. "5 riders," he murmured, "heading for the saloon." Hannah's heart hammered in her chest. For months she'd been alone in this ghost town with nothing but memories and the occasional passing traveler. Now, in a single evening, her sanctuary had become a battleground, if they're just passing through. She whispered hopefully. Yates shook his head. "They're not. That's Lee Blackwell himself leading them. I'd know that slouch in the saddle anywhere." He turned to Hannah, his expression grave in the dim light. "I need to get closer, hear what they're planning. You stay put, bar the door behind me." "You can't go out there alone," Hannah protested. "There are 5 of them." "This is what I do, Miss Porter." His voice was calm, confident. I'm not engaging them, just gathering information. He checked his revolver, then tucked a knife into his boot. If I'm not back in an hour, there's a trail behind your house that leads to the foothills. Follow it till you reach Miller's Creek, then head east. You'll hit the Colorado Springs Road by morning. Before Hannah could argue further, Yates slipped out the door into the darkness. She quickly barred it behind him, then returned to the window, straining to see. The night had grown pitch black, with only a sliver of moon offering scant illumination. Somewhere in that darkness, a U.S. Marshal was stalking 5 killers, and all because he'd found her in this ghost town and decided she shouldn't face danger alone. Hannah retrieved her father's old pocket watch from the mantel. 1 hour, Yates had said. She settled in to wait, rifle across her lap, listening to the wind moan through the empty town like restless spirits. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. 20 minutes. 30. At the 40-minute mark, gunshots erupted from the direction of the saloon. First one, then a rapid succession of 5 more. Hannah jumped to her feet, her heart in her throat. More shots followed, accompanied by shouts and the crash of breaking glass. She moved to the door, her hand on the bar, torn between the safety of her home and concern for the man who'd come to her aid. Before she could decide, heavy footsteps pounded on the porch and someone hammered on the door. "Miss Porter, it's Yates, let me in." Hannah quickly lifted the bar and opened the door. Yates practically fell inside, breathing hard, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. She quickly rebarred the door as he stumbled to a chair. "They spotted me," he gasped. "Got a bit messy." "You're hurt," Hannah said, already moving to gather medical supplies from her father's old doctor's bag. "It's just a graze," Yates insisted, though he winced when she began cleaning the wound. "The problem is they know someone's watching them now, and they'll search every building in town." Hannah worked efficiently, applying a clean bandage to his head. Her father had taught her well. "Did you learn anything before they found you?" Yates nodded grimly. "They're planning to hit the Denver-bound train tomorrow night when it stops for water at the station 3 miles north. They've got dynamite planning to blow the express car, and now they're going to sweep the town to make sure there are no witnesses." Hannah's hands stilled. "How long do we have?" "They were still arguing when I left." Blackwell wanted to start searching right away, but his brother Silas thought they should wait till dawn. Yates caught her wrist gently. "We need to leave, Hannah, now. Take only what you absolutely need." The use of her first name startled her, but there was no time to dwell on it. Hannah quickly gathered essentials: a change of clothes, her father's medical bag, the photograph of her parents on their wedding day, and a small box containing what little money she had left. She was ready in less than 10 minutes. "We'll take the back way," Yates said, checking his ammunition. "I've got a horse hidden in the trees about half a mile from here. If we can reach it without being spotted, we can make it to Pueblo by morning and alert the sheriff." Hannah took one last look around the home where she'd grown up. Every corner held memories: her father reading by the fire, teaching her to bandage wounds at the kitchen table; her mother's piano that no one had played since she died of fever when Hannah was 12. Leaving felt like a betrayal, but staying would be suicide. "I'll come back," she whispered to the empty rooms. Yates touched her shoulder gently. "Yes, you will, I promise." They slipped out the back door into the cool night air. The moon had risen higher now, casting silver light across the landscape. They kept to the shadows, moving silently past the stable and into the scrubby trees beyond Hannah's property. They had made it perhaps 200 yards when a shout came from behind them. "There! By the trees!" A shot rang out, kicking up dirt near Hannah's feet. Yates grabbed her hand, pulling her into a run. "Don't stop," he ordered as they crashed through underbrush. "No matter what happens, keep going north. More shots followed, bullets whizzing past them as they fled. Hannah's lungs burned, her skirts catching on brush and slowing her down. Behind them, she could hear men shouting and the sound of horses being mounted. "Here," Yates said suddenly, pulling her behind a large boulder. "We can't outrun horses. We need to lose them in the rocks." The terrain ahead grew more rugged, a maze of boulders and scrub pine leading up into the foothills. Yates led her through it with the confidence of someone who'd studied the land carefully, taking sharp turns and doubling back occasionally to confuse their trail. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, he finally stopped, listening intently. The sounds of pursuit had faded, though Hannah could still hear distant shouts carried on the wind. "We've bought some time," Yates whispered, "but they'll keep searching. We need to get to my horse." They continued more cautiously now, working their way north through the rocky terrain. Hannah was exhausted, her city-bred endurance no match for this kind of flight, but fear kept her moving forward. Yates remained vigilant, one hand always near his gun, the other often extended to help her over difficult passages. Finally, they reached a small clearing where a sturdy buckskin horse was tethered. The animal nickered softly as Yates approached. "Good boy, Thunder," he murmured, quickly checking the saddle and supplies. "We've got a long ride ahead." He helped Hannah mount first, then swung up behind her. The saddle wasn't designed for two, placing them in close proximity that would have been scandalous under normal circumstances. Hannah was too frightened to care about propriety now. "Hold tight," Yates instructed as he urged the horse forward. "We'll stick to the high ground for a few miles, then cut east toward Pueblo." As they rode, Hannah became increasingly aware of the man behind her, the solid strength of his chest against her back, the careful way he handled the reins to avoid jostling her, the faint scent of leather and pine that clung to him. It had been so long since she'd been this close to another person that the contact felt almost overwhelming. "I'm sorry," Yates said after they'd ridden in silence for some time. "I brought this danger to your doorstep." Hannah shook her head. "No, they were coming anyway. If you hadn't arrived when you did, I'd likely be dead already. Still, I've forced you from your home." "It was just a house," Hannah replied, though they both knew it was a lie. "I can always return once it's safe." They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horse. As dawn approached, they descended from the foothills onto the plains, where they could make better time. The distant outline of Pueblo appeared on the horizon just as the sun was rising fully. "We made it," Hannah breathed, her body aching from the long ride. Yates nodded, but his expression remained tense. "Blackwell won't give up easily. He's evaded capture for 2 years by eliminating witnesses. Until he's behind bars, you're still in danger." The reality of her situation crashed over Hannah like a wave. She had no home to return to, no family to shelter with, and killers on her trail. Her entire life had been uprooted in a single night. As if sensing her despair, Yates squeezed her shoulder gently. "I won't let any harm come to you, Miss Porter. That's a promise." It was a bold claim from a man she barely knew, but in that moment, with the sun rising over the plains and the warmth of his presence behind her, Hannah found herself believing him. They rode into Pueblo as the town was coming to life, drawing curious glances from early risers. Yates guided the horse directly to the sheriff's office, where a weathered sign proclaimed Sheriff Thomas Holloway in faded paint. The office was empty save for a deputy dozing in a chair, his boots propped on a desk. He startled awake as they entered, nearly toppling backward. "Marshal Donovan," he exclaimed, recognizing Yates immediately. "We weren't expecting you until next week." "Situation changed, Deputy Wilson," Yates replied tersely. "Where's Holloway?" "Home having breakfast, I reckon. What's happened?" The young deputy's eyes darted curiously to Hannah, taking in her disheveled appearance. Blackwell's gang is in Florence, planning to hit the Denver train tonight. Yates helped Hannah to a chair before continuing. I need you to send telegrams to Denver and Colorado Springs immediately. And get Holloway. We'll need at least 10 men if we're going to stop them. As the deputy hurried to comply, Yates turned to Hannah. You should get some rest. There's a decent hotel across the street. And leave you to face those men alone. Hannah shook her head firmly. I may not be a marshal, but I can shoot straight and I know Florence better than anyone. I'm coming with you. Yates frowned. It's too dangerous. My life is already in danger, Hannah countered. At least this way I might help end the threat. Their argument was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Holloway, a barrel-chested man with a silver mustache and piercing blue eyes. He listened gravely as Yates explained the situation, occasionally glancing at Hannah with obvious concern. So they've holed up in Florence, Holloway mused when Yates finished. That complicates things. It's outside my jurisdiction, technically speaking. They're planning to hit a train in your county, Yates pointed out, and they've threatened the life of a civilian. Holloway nodded slowly. Fair point. He studied Hannah for a moment. Miss Porter, I'm sorry about your situation. We'll do everything we can to help you return home safely. Thank you, Sheriff, Hannah replied. As for you, Donovan, Holloway continued, I can give you 5 men, that's all I can spare with the cattle drive coming through, but I'll send telegrams to surrounding towns for reinforcements. We'll take what we can get, Yates agreed, but we need to move quickly. The trains due at the Florence Water stop at 8 tonight. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Holloway assembled his posse, 5 seasoned deputies who had seen their share of trouble. Telegrams were dispatched, supplies gathered, weapons checked and cleaned. Hannah, despite Yates's continued objections, refused to be left behind. You need someone who knows the layout of Florence, she argued. Someone who can guide you through the back streets and tell you which buildings have clear sightlines to the station. In the end, Yates reluctantly agreed, though he insisted she remain well behind the fighting when it came time for confrontation. By mid-afternoon, they were riding north toward Florence, a determined band of 8 Yates, Hannah, Sheriff Holloway, and the 5 deputies. As they rode, Yates kept close to Hannah, their horses side by side. You've had quite a change of circumstances in the past day, he observed quietly. Hannah nodded, watching the landscape roll by. Yesterday I was alone in a ghost town. Today I'm riding with lawmen to confront outlaws. She glanced at him. Life takes strange turns, Marshal Donovan. Yates, he corrected her. After what we've been through, I think we're past formalities. Yates, she agreed, the name feeling oddly intimate on her lips. How did you become a marshal? You don't strike me as someone who spent his whole life enforcing the law. A shadow crossed his face. I grew up on a ranch in Texas, planned to follow in my father's footsteps. Then raiders hit our property during the war, killed my parents, burned everything. His jaw tightened at the memory. I was 16, away delivering horses to a neighboring ranch, came home to ashes. I'm sorry, Hannah said softly. I spent 3 years tracking those men down, Yates continued. When I finally found the last one, a marshal named Jenkins stopped me from killing him in cold blood. Said there was a better way to honor my parents' memory than becoming what I hated. He smiled faintly. He took me under his wing, taught me the law, been wearing this badge ever since. Hannah understood loss all too well. My mother died when I was 12. Fever took her so quickly, my father couldn't save her despite being a doctor. Then last winter, he caught consumption from a patient. She swallowed hard. I nursed him for 3 months before he passed. By then, most folks had already left Florence. The silver had played out and the town was dying around us. "Why did you stay?" Yates asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Hannah considered the question. "At first it was shock, I suppose, then inertia, and finally, pride. That house was all I had left. Leaving felt like admitting defeat." She laughed without humor. "Now I've been forced out anyway. Sometimes life makes choices for us that we're not ready to make ourselves," Yates observed. They fell silent as the trail narrowed, forcing them to ride single file. But something had shifted between them, a connection forged through shared confidences and mutual understanding of loss. By late afternoon, they had reached the outskirts of Florence. They dismounted in a sheltered ravine about a mile from town, tethering the horses where they wouldn't be easily spotted. Sheriff Holloway spread a rough map on a boulder, and everyone gathered around. "Based on Miss Porter's information, the gang is likely still at the saloon here," he said, pointing to a spot on the crude drawing. "The train will stop for water here, about 3 miles north of town. According to the telegraph from Denver, it's carrying a significant payroll for the mining operations in Leadville." Yates nodded. "That fits with Blackwell's pattern. He likes big scores, doesn't bother with anything less than $5,000. "The way I see it," Holloway continued, "we have two options. We can set up an ambush at the water stop and catch them in the act, or we can try to take them now in town." "Town's too risky," one of the deputies argued. "Too many places for them to hide, too many civilians who could get caught in crossfire." "There are no civilians," Hannah interjected. "Just me, and I'm here with you." All eyes turned to her, and she felt a sudden appreciation for what a strange sight she must present, a young woman in a travel-stained dress, discussing battle tactics with lawmen. "The saloon has only 2 exits," she explained. "Front door and back door leading to the privy. The windows are small and barred, remnants from wilder days. If they're still there, we could surround it." Holloway looked impressed. "That could work, especially if they're not expecting us. What do you think, Donovan?" Yates studied the map thoughtfully. "It's risky, but less so than letting them set up explosives near the train. If we can catch them unprepared, we might end this without bloodshed." The plan came together quickly. 2 deputies would circle around to cover the back exit. Holloway and another deputy would approach from the east side of town, while Yates and the remaining deputies would come in from the west. Hannah would remain in the ravine with the horses, ready to ride for help if things went wrong. This last part she protested vigorously, but Yates was adamant. "I can't focus on Blackwell if I'm worried about you," he told her privately as the others prepared to leave. "Please, Hannah, stay here." Something in his eyes' concern that went beyond professional duty made her reluctantly agree. The lawman departed as dusk approached, leaving Hannah alone with the horses and her anxious thoughts. The minutes stretched endlessly as she strained to hear any sound from the direction of town. When the first gunshots finally rang out, she jumped to her feet, heart pounding. More shots followed, dozens of them, along with distant shouts. Hannah paced nervously, torn between her promise to stay put and her desire to know what was happening. The gunfire continued for what seemed an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, then tapered off to occasional shots. When silence finally fell, it was somehow more terrifying than the gunfire had been. Hannah stood frozen, counting seconds, then minutes, with no sign of the lawman returning. Something had gone wrong, she felt it with crushing certainty. After 20 agonizing minutes, she made her decision. Grabbing a rifle from one of the saddle holsters, she began making her way cautiously toward Florence. The sun had set completely now, but a bright moon illuminated the path. She moved as quietly as she could, staying low and using what cover she could find. As she reached the outskirts of town, Hannah began to hear voices, unfamiliar ones, angry and triumphant. She crept closer, staying in the shadows between buildings until she could see the street in front of the saloon. What she saw made her blood run cold. 3 of the deputies lay on the ground, unmoving. Sheriff Holloway and the other deputies were on their knees, hands bound behind them. Standing over them were 5 men, all armed, all looking pleased with themselves. Of Yates, there was no sign. "Walked right into our trap," one of the outlaws was saying, a tall man with a shock of red hair visible beneath his hat. "Blackwell's going to be mighty pleased when he gets back." Hannah's heart leapt. If the leader wasn't here, there was still hope. And if Yates wasn't among the captured or the fallen, he might be free as well. She backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound. She needed to find Yates, or at least determine what had happened to him. The fact that Blackwell was elsewhere was concerning. Had he somehow learned about the train ambush plan and gone ahead alone? Hannah circled the town, checking alleys and side streets, until a low groan from behind the livery stable caught her attention. She approached cautiously, rifle ready, and found Yates propped against the wall, clutching his side where blood darkened his shirt. "Yates!" she whispered urgently, rushing to his side. He looked up, momentary confusion in his eyes before recognition dawned. "Hannah, you shouldn't be here." "Neither should you, bleeding in an alley," she countered, already examining his wound. "What happened?" Yates winced as she probed gently. "Ambush. They were waiting for us. Must have spotted us approaching." He gritted his teeth as she applied pressure to the wound. "Bullet grazed my side. I played dead until they moved on with the others." "Blackwell wasn't with them," Hannah informed him as she tore strips from her petticoat to bandage his side. "One of them mentioned he'd be pleased when he gets back." "The train," Yates realized, attempting to stand. "He's gone ahead to the water stop. We have to warn them." Hannah helped him to his feet, supporting him when he swayed. "You're in no condition to ride." "Have to," he insisted, his face pale with pain and determination. "Those men on that train are walking into a death trap." Hannah knew arguing would waste precious time. "Then we go together. Can you make it back to the horses?" With Hannah's support, they made their way slowly through the darkness to the ravine where the horses waited. Each step seemed to cost Yates tremendous effort, but he refused to stop or rest. By the time they reached the horses, his face was sheened with sweat despite the cool night air. "Help me up," he said, gesturing to Thunder. Hannah assisted him into the saddle, then mounted her own horse. "The water stop is north, right? How far?" 3 miles, Yates confirmed, gathering the reins with shaking hands. "We have maybe half an hour before the train arrives." They set off at the fastest pace Yates could manage, following the railroad tracks that gleamed silver in the moonlight. Hannah kept close, watching him anxiously, ready to catch him if he should fall. But despite his injury, Yates remained upright through sheer force of will, his face set in grim determination. As they approached the water, stopped little more than a water tower and a small shed beside the tracks, Hannah could make out movement in the shadows. 3 men were positioning something on the tracks while a 4th kept watch. "Dynamite," Yates whispered. "They're not just planning to rob the train, they're going to derail it first." "What do we do?" Hannah asked, fear and determination warring within her. "We're outnumbered and I'm not at my best," Yates admitted, "but we have surprise on our side, and we have to try." He drew his revolver with his good arm. "I'll create a distraction. You circle around and try to get to that dynamite." Before Hannah could protest this dangerous plan, the distant whistle of the approaching train echoed through the night. Time had run out. Yates spurred Thunder forward, charging directly toward the outlaws. "U.S. Marshal," he shouted. "Drop your weapons," the outlaws reacted with startled shouts, scrambling for cover and drawing their guns. Shots rang out as Yates fired and the outlaws returned fire. Using the distraction, Hannah urged her horse around to the far side of the tracks, dismounting quickly and staying low. The train whistle sounded again, closer now. Hannah could see the distant headlamp approaching around the bend. The dynamite sat on the tracks, fuses not yet lit but ready. She crept forward, heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would give her away. 20 yards to her left, Yates continued to exchange fire with the outlaws, keeping them occupied. One man fell, but Yates's movement had become sluggish, his injury clearly taking its toll. Hannah reached the tracks and grabbed the bundles of dynamite, tossing them as far as she could into the surrounding scrubland. As she turned to retreat, a voice behind her froze her in place. "Well, well, what have we here?" She turned slowly to find herself facing a man whose face she knew only from wanted posters, Illy Blackwell himself, tall and lean, with cold eyes and a thin scar running down one cheek. "The ghost town girl," he said, recognition dawning. "Should have known you'd be trouble." Hannah's rifle was still slung across her back, impossible to reach before Blackwell could fire the revolver pointed at her chest. She glanced desperately toward Yates, but he was pinned down behind a boulder, exchanging fire with the remaining outlaws. The train whistle blew again, much closer now. Blackwell smiled coldly. "Too late to stop it now. Even without the dynamite, my boys will take that train." "Your boys are either dead or captured back in Florence," Hannah bluffed, trying to buy time. "The law knows you're here." Uncertainty flickered in Blackwell's eyes, the first sign of weakness she'd seen. In that moment of hesitation, Hannah dropped to the ground and rolled, hearing the bullet whistle over her head as Blackwell fired. She came up running, zigzagging to present a more difficult target. Another shot kicked up dirt by her feet. The train was rounding the bend now, its bright headlamp illuminating the scene in harsh light. "Hannah!" Yates's voice rang out over the chaos. She turned to see him emerge from cover, firing repeatedly at Blackwell despite his own injury. The outlaw turned to face this new threat, giving Hannah the opening she needed to unsling her rifle. The train's brakes screeched as the engineer spotted people on the tracks ahead. Blackwell, realizing his plan was unraveling, made a desperate dash toward his horse. Hannah raised her rifle and fired, the bullet striking him in the leg. He stumbled but kept moving. Yates fired again, and Blackwell finally fell. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader down, threw down their weapons in surrender just as the train ground to a halt 50 yards from the water tower. The aftermath unfolded in a blur of activity. The train conductor and several armed guards secured the outlaws while the engineer tended to Yates's wound. Hannah found herself explaining the situation to a skeptical railroad detective, who gradually became more respectful as her story was corroborated by Yates and the evidence before them. "You saved a lot of lives tonight, Miss Porter," the detective finally acknowledged. "The railroad will want to reward you." But Hannah's attention was on Yates, who sat pale but alert on a crate near the water tower, refusing further medical attention until he was sure everyone was safe. "What about Sheriff Holloway and the others?" she asked him when she could finally break away from the detective. "I've sent men to Florence to free them," he assured her. "Blackwell's gang is finished." Hannah sat beside him, suddenly exhausted as the danger passed and tension drained from her body. "So what happens now?" Yates looked at her thoughtfully. "For me, there'll be reports to file, prisoners to transport. For you," he hesitated, "you can go home to Florence if that's what you want." The thought of returning to her empty house in the ghost town no longer held the appeal it once had. In the past 24 hours, Hannah had experienced more life than in months of solitary existence in Florence. "I'm not sure that's what I want anymore," she admitted softly. Yates's hand found hers in the darkness, warm despite all he'd been through. Then perhaps you need time to discover what you do want. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, possibility, potential, the seed of something neither had been looking for but both had found. I think, Hannah said carefully, I'd like to see Pueblo properly without outlaws chasing me. Yates smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. I'd be honored to show you, Miss Porter, once we've both had some rest and recovery. As dawn broke over the eastern plains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Hannah felt something she hadn't experienced since before her father's death hope, and the curious lightness that comes with new beginnings. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Hannah found herself a minor celebrity in Pueblo after the story of the foiled train robbery spread. The railroad company, grateful for her role in preventing the theft of their payroll and the potential loss of life, presented her with a substantial reward enough to settle her father's outstanding debts and still have a comfortable sum remaining. She took a room at the Stockman Hotel, a respectable establishment catering to travelers and business people. For the first time in months, she enjoyed the luxury of regular meals prepared by someone else and conversations with people other than herself. Yates, meanwhile, was occupied with the aftermath of Blackwell's capture. The outlaw leader and his surviving gang members were locked in the Pueblo jail awaiting trial, while Sheriff Holloway and his deputies recovered from their ordeal. There were statements to be taken, reports to be filed, and telegrams to be sent to various jurisdictions where the gang had committed crimes. Despite his busy schedule, Yates made time each day to check on Hannah. Sometimes it was just a brief visit in the hotel lobby, other times a meal shared in the dining room, but each encounter strengthened the connection that had formed during their night of danger and courage. "You're looking well," he observed one evening as they sat on the hotel's veranda, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in purple and gold. His own wound was healing nicely, the bandages gone and only a stiffness in his movement betraying the recent injury. "Rest and regular meals can work wonders," Hannah replied with a smile. She had purchased a few new dresses with her reward money, simple but well made, and had visited the town's hairdresser. The haunted look that had lingered in her eyes after her father's death had begun to fade. "Have you decided what you'll do next?" Yates asked, the question that had hovered between them for days finally spoken aloud. Hannah sighed, watching a hawk circle lazily in the distance. "I've been thinking about that. Florence holds so many memories, but I'm not sure I can go back to that solitude." She turned to look at him directly. "What about you? Once the trial is over, where will you go?" "Wherever the Marshal Service sends me," he said with a shrug. Then, more carefully, "Though I've been considering requesting a permanent assignment to this district, Colorado grows on a person." The unspoken question hung in the air between them. In 2 short weeks, they had developed a friendship that seemed to be evolving into something deeper, but neither had put words to their feelings yet. "I've received an interesting offer," Hannah said after a moment. "Dr. Williams, you met him when he treated your wound, has proposed that I work with him. He says my knowledge of medicine, learned from my father, would be valuable in his practice." "That sounds like a fine opportunity," Yates said, though she detected a hint of disappointment in his voice. "In Pueblo," she added, watching his expression carefully, his eyes brightened. "So you'd be staying?" "I'm considering it," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. "I find I've grown fond of this town and certain of its inhabitants." Yates reached across the small table between them, his hand covering hers. "I'm glad to hear it, Miss Porter. Very glad indeed. The trial of Lee Blackwell and his gang began the following week, drawing curious spectators from throughout the region. Hannah testified about her encounter with the outlaws in Florence, and at the water stop, earning admiring glances from the jury and spectators alike. Yates, in his marshal's uniform with his badge gleaming in the courtroom light, presented the evidence with professional detachment that nonetheless conveyed the seriousness of the crimes. The verdict, when it came 3 days later, surprised no one. Guilty on all counts, with Blackwell himself sentenced to hang and his men to lengthy prison terms. As the courtroom emptied following the judge's pronouncement, Hannah found herself experiencing an unexpected melancholy. "It's over," she said quietly as Yates joined her outside the courthouse. "Really over?" He studied her face. "Having second thoughts about your testimony?" "No," she assured him. "They deserved what they got. It's just—" She struggled to articulate her feelings. For a while there was a clear purpose to everything. "Now I have to decide what comes next, and that's somehow more daunting than facing outlaws." Yates nodded in understanding. "I know what you mean. After I tracked down my parents' killers, I felt lost for a time. Even becoming a marshal was as much about filling that void as it was about seeking justice." They walked together through the busy streets of Pueblo, their conversation turning to lighter topics as the afternoon wore on. Yates showed her parts of the town she hadn't yet explored: the new library, the park by the river, the area where new houses were being built to accommodate the town's growth. As evening approached, he led her to a small restaurant tucked away on a side street, its windows glowing warmly in the gathering dusk. "Best steak in Colorado," he promised as he held the door for her. "At least according to the owner, and I haven't found evidence to contradict him yet." The restaurant was intimate, with perhaps a dozen tables, most occupied by what appeared to be regular patrons. The owner, a robust man with an impressive mustache, greeted Yates by name and showed them to a corner table with a view of both the street and the room. "Old habit," Yates explained when Hannah noticed his preference for the seat facing the door. "Always know your exits." They ordered steaks and a bottle of wine, then fell into comfortable conversation about their pasts, Yates's childhood on the Texas ranch, Hannah's years learning medicine at her father's side. As they spoke, Hannah realized how much of herself she'd been holding back during her months of isolation, how many stories and memories had gone unshared in the silence of her empty home. "I've talked too much," she said eventually, noticing their plates had been cleared away and the wine was nearly gone. "Not at all," Yates assured her, his eyes warm in the candlelight. "I enjoy listening to you." He hesitated, then added more softly, "I enjoy everything about your company, Hannah." The use of her first name, still rare enough to feel intimate, sent a pleasant warmth through her that had nothing to do with the wine. "I've been thinking," he continued, his fingers tracing patterns on the tablecloth. "My assignment here is confirmed for at least the next year. I'll be based in Pueblo but traveling the territory." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "I'd like to court you properly if you'd permit it." Despite having sensed the direction of his thoughts, Hannah found herself momentarily speechless. After months of isolation followed by weeks of uncertainty, the prospect of a defined relationship, especially with this man who had risked his life for her, was both thrilling and frightening. "I'd like that," she finally replied, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "Very much." His smile in response was brilliant, transforming his usually serious face. "Good. That's good." They walked back to her hotel slowly, savoring the mild evening and their new understanding. At the hotel entrance, Yates took her hand and kissed it gently, a gesture both old-fashioned and deeply affecting. "Until tomorrow, Miss Porter," he said formally, though his eyes conveyed emotions far more complex than his words. "Until tomorrow, Marshal Donovan," she replied with equal formality, but couldn't suppress her smile. The following months brought a rhythm to Hannah's life that she had never expected to find again after the loss of her family and home. She accepted Dr. Williams's offer and began working in his practice 3 days a week, her natural aptitude for medicine quickly making her an asset. While Colorado law prevented her from becoming a doctor herself without formal training, her role as a nurse and assistant allowed her to use the skills her father had taught her. When not at the practice, she volunteered at the small school, teaching reading and basic arithmetic to the younger children. The work was fulfilling, connecting her to the community in ways she hadn't experienced since Florence's decline. Yates's duties took him away from Pueblo frequently, tracking fugitives or delivering prisoners to Denver, but he always returned to her. Their courtship progressed through summer and into autumn with a comfortable certainty that neither rushed nor stagnated. There were picnics by the river, evenings at the small theater that had opened on Main Street, Sunday afternoons reading together on the hotel veranda. Hannah discovered Yates's unexpected passion for poetry, particularly Whitman and Longfellow, while he learned of her talent for sketching, a hobby she'd abandoned during her father's illness. "You should visit Florence," Yates suggested one October afternoon as they walked among trees aflame with fall colors. "Properly, I mean, to collect your belongings and say goodbye if that's what you choose." Hannah had been avoiding thoughts of her former home, but she knew he was right. "Would you come with me?" she asked. "Of course," he replied without hesitation. "Whenever you're ready." They made the journey the following week, riding together through countryside transformed by autumn's touch. As Florence came into view, Hannah was struck by how small and forlorn it looked, even more abandoned than when she'd left it months before. They approached her house slowly, Hannah's emotions in turmoil as memories washed over her. The door was unlocked as she'd left it during their hasty departure, though someone had clearly searched the place in their absence, drawers left open and items scattered. "Blackwell's men, probably," Yates observed, his hand never far from his gun despite the obvious emptiness of the town. Hannah moved through the rooms, touching familiar objects, selecting items to take with her: her mother's wedding ring and cameo, her father's medical books and journals, the family Bible with its record of births, marriages, and deaths. These treasures she wrapped carefully and placed in saddlebags. "So much life happened here," she said as they prepared to leave, looking around the house one last time. "It feels strange to just walk away." Yates stood beside her, respectful of her moment of farewell. "You're not walking away from the memories, just the place that holds them. They go with you." Hannah nodded, finding wisdom in his words. As they stepped outside, she paused on the porch, looking out over the town that had been her entire world for so many years. "It's not really a ghost town," she said suddenly. "Ghost implies something dead that lingers. Florence isn't dead, it's just waiting." She gestured to the empty buildings, the silent streets. "Someday someone will find a reason to come back, copper maybe, or some other mineral, or the railroad will need a new stop, and it will live again." Yates smiled at her optimism. "I believe you're right. Nothing in the West stays abandoned forever." As they rode away, Hannah found her heart lighter than she'd expected. The visit had provided closure she hadn't realized she needed, allowing her to fully embrace her new life in Pueblo. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Pueblo in snow by mid-November. The cold weather kept Yates closer to town, his duties shifting to paperwork and local concerns rather than long pursuits. He rented a small house on the edge of town, a modest but comfortable place that Hannah helped furnish with items found at the general store and occasional auctions. "It needs a woman's touch," he admitted as they arranged chairs near the fireplace one evening. "Is that a hint, Marshal Donovan?" Hannah teased, though her heart skipped at the implication. Yates looked momentarily flustered, then determined. "Not how I plan to do this," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Then, to her astonishment, he knelt before her, taking her hand in his. "Hannah Porter, I have loved you since that night when bullets were flying, and you still insisted on helping strangers on a train you'd never met. You are the bravest, kindest, most stubborn woman I've ever known, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold ring set with a small diamond. "Will you marry me?" Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes, overwhelmed by emotion. This man, who had found her alone in a ghost town and declared that no one should face the dark alone, was offering her a lifetime of companionship and love. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Yates, I will marry you." The ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit. As he stood and gathered her into his arms, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that she had found her home not in a place, but in a person. They married on Christmas Eve in Pueblo's small church, decorated with pine boughs and candles for the holiday. Dr. Williams gave the bride away, while Sheriff Holloway stood as Yates's best man. The congregation was small but sincere colleagues and friends they'd made in their months in town, all bearing witness to a union that had begun in danger but blossomed in peace. Hannah wore a gown of cream satin, simple but elegant, with her mother's cameo at her throat. Yates, in a new black suit rather than his marshal's uniform, watched her approach the altar with an expression of such wonder that she felt beautiful in a way she never had before. The minister's words washed over them promises of loyalty and love, of partnership through whatever life might bring. When it came time for their vows, Yates spoke clearly, his voice carrying to the rafters, while Hannah's response was quieter but no less certain. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, and as Yates kissed her, applause broke out among their well-wishers. They celebrated with a small reception at the hotel, where the proprietor had prepared a special dinner in their honor. As snowflakes drifted past the windows and a fiddler played cheerful tunes, Hannah found herself marveling at the journey that had brought her here from isolation in a ghost town to the center of this circle of warmth and friendship. "Happy?" Yates asked softly as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. "More than I thought possible," she assured him, resting her head briefly on his shoulder. Later, as they walked through the snowy night to the house that was now their home together, Yates paused to look up at the star-filled sky. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small packet wrapped in tissue paper. A wedding gift. Hannah unwrapped it carefully to find a silver badge nestled in the paper, a deputy marshal's badge, identical to Yates's except for the size. "I pulled some strings," he explained. "The territory needs good people who know medicine and can handle themselves in a crisis. You'd be assigned to work with me officially, if you want it," he added hastily. "Your work with Dr. Williams is important too, and I wouldn't ask you to." Hannah silenced him with a kiss. "I want it," she said when they parted. "Both, if possible. Doctor's assistant by day, deputy marshal when needed." Yates grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that. We make a good team, Mrs. Donovan." "The best," she agreed, tucking the badge carefully into her own coat. "Now take me home, Marshal. It's cold out here and no one should face the dark alone." "Never again," he promised, offering his arm. "Never again." Spring came early to Colorado in 1884, bringing new growth and possibilities. Hannah divided her time between her work with Dr. Williams and her duties as a special deputy marshal, a unique arrangement that raised eyebrows among traditionalists, but proved its worth repeatedly. Her medical knowledge saved lives after a mine collapse outside town, while her steady aim helped Yates capture a notorious horse thief who'd eluded the law for months. They settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. Their small house gradually became a home, filled with books, mementos of their adventures, and eventually, the patter of tiny feet. Their son, James Thomas Donovan, arrived on a bright May morning in 1885, bearing his father's gray eyes and his mother's determined spirit. "He'll be riding before he walks," Yates predicted proudly as he cradled his infant son. Hannah watched them together, her heart full, "and doctoring before he talks with any luck." Life continued to unfold in ways neither could have predicted on that fateful night when a lone marshal rode into an abandoned town and found a woman who refused to leave her past behind. Together, they built something neither could have created alone: a family, a partnership, a legacy of courage and compassion that would endure long after Florence had faded from memory. And in the quiet moments, when darkness fell across the Colorado plains and their son slept peacefully in his cradle, Yates would often pull Hannah close and whisper the words that had changed both their lives forever. No one should face the dark alone. To which she would always reply with a kiss and a smile, "And thanks to you, my love, I never will again."